Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to the 14th lecture of public finance. We have, as I like basically start before every lecture, that we have come a long way in under covering various topics of public finance. After covering basically the role of the government, we came to the point where we were discussing and evaluating various projects or various initiatives of the government. And that's where, at least in my view, the things turn little interesting, because what we have learned theoretically, now we are discussing more on application grounds, and we are successfully able to evaluate various projects of the government. Now, in the last lecture, in fact, in lecture 13, we started the cost-benefit analysis, in which all the costs, like direct costs and indirect costs, as well as all the benefits, direct and indirect benefits of a project, are listed and evaluated. Now, based on that, we started with the three steps of that are involved in cost-benefit analysis. The first step was enumerating all the costs and benefits, meaning the listing of all the costs and benefits. Then second one was evaluating all the costs and benefits, and in that case it was how we would put dollar value to various direct and indirect costs, as well as direct and indirect benefits. And then we came to the point where we discussed that we needed to discount all the future returns, either in term or future expenditures like cost and benefits, and discount them to the present value to evaluate them together. It would only be possible to evaluate a project if we use the present values and not the future values. Now, based on that, we came to discussing the discount rate, which was basically the topic covered under lecture 13. Now, we discussed that the social rate of return, which is used to discount using a formula where any return divided by or discounted through the social rate of return gives the present value. In that, we discussed that the social discount factor, actually the rate which has been selected, which is selected to evaluate a project, actually matters a lot, because a lower discount rate tends to give the results, in which case future returns are preferable, while a higher discount rate tends to favor a project which gives the current returns. Now, why that happens? Because then we discussed what is actually the social rate of return. Social rate of return is actually the opportunity cost of funding or investments utilized by the government. Opportunity cost in the sense that those resources can be utilized by a private sector. So higher the opportunity cost of those funds, higher would be the discount rate, and current benefits would be preferred. And lower the opportunity cost, because we can say that if private sector does not have any alternative means of using those resources, then discounting them to the present value would result into preference of future projects, future returns. So we discussed the importance of the social discount rate. We also discussed that social discount rate actually is a very important parameter. We also mentioned over here that all the three steps involved in cost-benefit analysis are very, very important. Why I am trying to explore all of this again, because we are in this lecture, we are going to explore some hypothetical examples of conducting cost-benefit analysis and see where the mistakes are made. So in that case, we needed to see that what type of discount factor should be used by the government. And while seeing that various discount rates have different effects on the valuation of a project or on the final outcome of our decision whether to accept a project or not, we came to the point where we discussed that the government must see what is the effect of its actions on the economy and on the various rate of returns. Basically, the total funds available in the economy are supplied by the savers and demanded by the investors. So that point of intersection or the point of equilibrium defines how much funds are available at a given rate of interest or a given rate of return. And government actions in terms of taxes or subsidies might affect or distort that point of equilibrium. So government needs to consider the effects of its own actions while looking at the discount rates. And we considered an example where the government had taxed the investors at 50% rate, and the initial equilibrium was at 16%, but when the government taxed, the demand curve shifted inwards, and that resulted into a rate of 10%. But since investors are taxed at 50%, so their gross return was 20%, because 50% of that return they have to pay as taxes. So in that case, government needs to consider what sort of activity they are displacing in the economy by utilizing those funds. If they are displacing the investment activities in the economy, then they should use the social discount rate equal to the rate of return of the investors, which in our case was 20%. And if the government was using government's investment was displacing the consumption activities, then it should use the discount rate, which is being the net rate by, for example, savers in the economy. So, or maybe we also discussed that if there is a mix of these activities, then it would be very useful by the government to use an average of all the returns available in the economy. So basically we highlighted that the use of an optimal or ideal social discount rate would affect the outcome of our decision whether the project should be accepted or rejected. Now, then we moved on to the point where government can rank various projects, and before that we also discussed that certain analysts might use weighing of benefits, that where actually the benefits and costs are accruing towards, whether it is like lower income people or people with higher income, and whether it is like one geographical location to other geographical location, that in terms of distribution of cost and benefits. And we also highlighted over here that no doubt the distribution of cost and benefits is very important, but one more thing is important, that is efficiency. So efficiency should not be confused with the distribution of the cost and benefits. So they need to be considered separately. Then we discussed that government, after doing a very comprehensive cost and benefit analysis, they can rank various projects in terms of net benefit criteria or in terms of benefit cost ratio criteria, and in that case they can rank the projects and they can choose the project which is giving the maximum benefit out of it. We then consider, for example, a graphical example in which new highway is to be, for example, the existing highway is to be extended, and we discussed that whenever marginal social benefit of a project is greater than marginal social cost, it always pays to start that project, and there would be a net gain. And if marginal social cost is above the marginal social benefit, then that project should not be taken up, because it is already beyond the equilibrium point, which equilibrium point would exactly be where marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost, and where the gap between total social benefit and total social cost is maximum. Then we also discussed the importance of infrastructure of the government, because we highlighted over here that governments would build roads and bridges and dams and airports, and all those activities as utilized by the private sector, and private sector uses those resources provided or public goods provided by the government for their own business interests. Roads constructed by the government or bridges constructed by the government reduces the time in terms of transfer of goods and various transactions and traveling of private vehicles. And then also air safety, for example, which is carried out by the government, also ensures that goods and various private individuals can travel without any risk of loss of life or loss of goods. And we also discuss certain other projects. But the point was over here that the main aim is that whenever the government utilizes the resources, there is an opportunity cost to use of those resources. The utilization of those resources is no doubt very important. Certain such projects like building of roads and dams and air safety and road safety are very important for private sector also. But then government needs to see the opportunity cost of that project in terms of utilization of those resources by the private sector. So whether the government project would give more net benefit or the private sector would give more net benefit, and that would be the cost benefit analysis through which certain decisions can be made. Now we also highlighted over here in the end that the analyst might need to use some arbitrary ideas in terms of evaluating the project, because it is measuring the cost and benefit and listing the cost and benefit is not always same. It is not exactly a science of 1 + 1 = 2. There is some intuition, there is some experience required, and there is certain level of insight. So in the end we said that it is more of a art than a science. So from there on, in terms of cost and benefit analysis in this lecture, we would be considering certain hypothetical examples in some cases, and we also wherever necessary we would quote some existing or for example past projects which have been analyzed, and we would see if what can be done to improve those scenarios. Now the first example that we would quote, again we started with this, that irrigation project which is supposed to be taken up by government to provide any additional benefits to farmers to increase the fertility of land. So in this case we need to consider the direct benefits and direct cost. So what would be the direct benefit? Direct benefit would actually be increase in water availability for farmers of the area. Now I guess I might need to define the direct benefit and direct cost and indirect benefit and indirect cost again. Direct benefits and direct costs are those benefit and those costs which are directly attributable, which can directly be assigned to that project be taken up by the government, and indirect benefit and indirect cost would be which are implied and which might be occurring and which might be which are not very obvious in the start. So they also need to be accounted for to consider the true social value in terms of benefit and cost of a project taken up by the government. So if there is an irrigation project by the government to increase the fertility of land in certain area and certain geographical location, there is a hypothetical project over here, and a similar kind of estimate was done in terms of in USA back in 1967 in the state of Nebraska. Now before going to that, let's discuss our hypothetical example where the direct benefit to the farmers is increased availability of water for farmers of that area. Now we discussed this sort of an example earlier, because now the value of that water flow towards the farmer is not immediately calculated, cannot be calculated, because increased water flow cannot be priced, because in the existence of like no rights on water or in the existence of no market for provision of water. So in that case that increased flow cannot be quantified. The first thing was to list the benefits and costs, and the second thing was evaluating them in terms of dollar value. So what happened over here is that we considered this example earlier, but we would take this example this time step by step. First we did it just to understand the concept of direct benefit and indirect benefits and direct cost and indirect cost, but this time we would consider all the aspects of it. Now increased water flow cannot be priced. So what is the solution to that? Now increase in agri yield can be attributed to increase in water flow. Now what we can say is that once the water flow has increased and the land is more fertile now, so there should be more output out of it, and that output can be priced in the market. So we are using a proxy for increased water flow, the value of increased water flow in terms the prices of the crop that is being produced and being sold in the market. So in other words, the increase in agriculture yield, which is associated to increase in the flow of water, now that can be measured, and that would be actually an estimate of marginal productivity of that increased flow or more water. So we can use that. Now we also discussed in last time that in order to avoid the problem of double counting, because once the agriculture yield out of that land improves, its value would actually go up. So if we consider that land's value also, and we consider the increase in agriculture yield in terms of prices, we would be double counting the same scenario. So we need to be careful when allocating the benefits and costs. So similar sort of, as I said, that similar sort of process was conducted in USA, in Nebraska, state of Nebraska, in 1967. Now they took up that project for 44,000 acres, and they estimated the net benefits, and they estimated the benefits to be $2.5 million in those times. Now there was a mistake in this scenario actually. That's why I'm quoting that example over here. As we discussed that while enumerating, it is very simple to make a list, but while evaluating those, we discussed that very clearly, that a mistake in one of these steps might result into sort of a disastrous outcome, because a project that should be taken up might be rejected, and the project which might be rejected might be taken up. So in this case, the project was taken up based on irrigation of 44,000 acres, and what the mistake was over here, that in order to value the increased flow of water, they used increase in agri yield and the prices in the market, which we have proposed over here for our hypothetical project as well. Now the whole point of it is that that increase in the prices actually that were being offered in 1967 in the market were already subsidized by the government. So the mistake over here was that they actually used the subsidized prices to calculate the agri yield or estimate of marginal productivity. So when accounting for the water flow, the value of water flow, the prices that were used in the market were the subsidized prices, not actually the market prices. Now the subsidized prices are might be much higher than the market prices. As we expressed before, that whenever a farmer is subsidized, one subsidy is in terms of, for example, reduced cost of inputs. Another subsidy might be in terms of price ceilings and price floors. You know, whenever, in fact, price floors. So whenever a government establishes a price floor, for example, 100 rupees or $100 per ton of $100 per kg of wheat. Now, if that is a price floor, any price below that level, in case the price in the market falls below that level, the government would buy it from the farmers at $100, and if the price goes above, up to maybe 150, then they are allowed to sell in the market. So the prices were subsidized in those time periods, and actual market prices might be, for example, $70 per kg, but while they were evaluating, they used the price of $100 per kg, which was actually not only because of increased water flow, but also it accounted for the government subsidy. So there was an error over there, which we discussed earlier, that it is very important to eliminate any errors or any mistakes that might occur while evaluating a project. So when the project was recalculated, so the actual benefit was less than $1 million. You can see initially they said that the actual benefit towards the benefit originating from that irrigation project in 1967 of 44,000 acres was $2.5 million, but on real terms, when they accounted for that subsidy, that error that took place earlier while evaluating, it was only $1 million, or in fact less than $1 million. So there is a huge difference between them, and one simple mistake might cause such a big difference. Now, what would be indirect benefits? Indirect benefit might be, for example, when they create a reservoir for that storage of water for that irrigation facility. They might create an artificial lake out of that. So if that artificial lake is created, that lake can also be used for recreational activities. Now, how do we put a price tag on those recreational activities? Now, it is no doubt difficult, and it is no doubt difficult to calculate the utility that people derive out of or to put a dollar value on the utility that people derived out of recreational activities. But one simpler way would be to put a price tag on it, that how much people would be willing to pay to go to that lake and maybe have picnics or do swimming or do fishing, and all those recreational activities can be used in terms of dollar values, in terms of when people are asked to put a price tag on that. In that sense, it can be either a survey can be conducted for that, or maybe government can actually cordon that area and put price tags on those activities, and then they can see what would be the demand in terms of the given prices. So as we are going through this hypothetical irrigation project, as I mentioned, that it is not only important to see the direct benefits and direct costs, but it is also important to account for the indirect benefits, the externalities that originate out of certain projects, and the true social value of any project or true social benefit of any project would be when externalities, the prices of externalities, are also included in that. So in order to calculate the true social benefit, we need to consider the direct cost as well as the indirect cost. Now, that example that we discussed in the last lecture was a simpler form of this, because that was just to understand the concept of direct cost and indirect cost, and direct benefit and indirect benefit. But over here we are conducting sort of a real-time analysis and discussing what indirect benefits and direct benefits can come out of it. And we have also taken an example to see the mistakes that might be done while evaluating or while evaluating the benefits. Now, moving on, since we have considered the indirect benefits and placed a dollar value on that also, that artificial lake might be created out of those for while creating a reservoir for irrigation facility, and that artificial lake might be used by people of that area for fishing and swimming and other picnics and other recreational activities. So it is very important to see the cost of see the price of this positive externality that has originated from the irrigation project, in order to see the true social value of that project. Because what we need to do over here is that we need to see the opportunity cost of those funds that the government has taken from the economy, and because those funds and resources could have been utilized by the private sector. So if the government has taken those funds, whether it would be useful, it would be more beneficial, or there would be higher net benefit when government uses those funds, or maybe there would be higher net benefits when private sector uses those funds. And when those are discounted at a social discount rate, we can actually have a quantitative analysis to whether accept or reject that project. So then we come to the direct costs for that hypothetical irrigation project. Certain costs can be directly attributable to the project, like for example the cost of labor, that is again directly paid, and that can be accounted for in dollar values. Then for example, valuation of labor cost, the issue is valuation of labor cost now, because that project would be creating jobs in terms of when they start that project. So there is a huge debate on that, because there is a huge debate on that, because once it is a period of recession in the economy, and there is higher level of unemployment, and that is mentioned over here as unemployment periods. So if a job has been created, it should be assigned a higher value. So so the valuation of labor cost is another issue even in the direct cost analysis. So we need to consider that if governments, unless does funding through deficit financing, then that would mean it is creating more value. The aim of this discussion would be that there is like view of certain economists that under the period of higher unemployment levels, whenever the government creates jobs in an area, that should mean that the labor cost should be put equal to zero. Now that is again debatable, that why labor cost should be put zero, because they would argue that government is creating jobs and that is not just a cost that would go towards the benefit also. But the point over here is that that argument might be faulty based on two grounds. Number one is that unless the government has used deficit finance would be in a sense that funds from the private sector has not been extracted. Now if deficit finance is not used, then the government is like using the resources from the private sector, and those funds have an opportunity cost. So it is not just like creation of new jobs without any opportunity cost of those funds. So if there is an opportunity cost of those funds, labor cost should be incorporated in direct cost. And the second argument is that creation of an irrigation facility requires specialized workers, and it's not that those simple labor in that area can be utilized for that creation of irrigation facility. Those laborers would have to be attracted from some other sort of project. So again there is a cost to that also, because government is employing resources from private sector, and those resources have their opportunity cost. Now you see over here that while conducting the cost benefit analysis, there have been debates. At first we had a debate of the direct benefits, and then we had a debate over indirect benefits. Now we are having a debate over direct cost, that what should be direct cost and even how the labor cost should be evaluated. Now as I said that there are certain very simplistic assumptions that we need to take while conducting a cost benefit analysis, and it is also very important to have an insight on the true issues. And there would be criticisms and there would be certain arguments which would go against, for example, just including labor cost. There is a debate whether it should be included and whether it should not be included. So it is very important to see the right aspect while conducting a true cost benefit analysis that would give a right outcome. So in short, the direct cost for the project would be, for example, in terms of the labor cost, and in terms of the capital that has been employed, and in terms of the land that has been procured for that irrigation facility, in terms of the land that has been procured for creation of that lake or water reservoir. So all those costs are the direct costs. No doubt there are debates over it, but still one has to have some insight on the ideals based on which a project is being taken up. And not every project is similar to the next one to it. So one needs to consider all the aspects and conduct a dynamic analysis. Now we are then we come up to the indirect costs that are involved in that. Now there is certain loss of agri land, which we have discussed in the last lecture also, that land has been procured for irrigation of most of the area, and that procured land could also have been, for example, agri land also, and that agri land is no more available for production of agriculture crop. So that would again come as an opportunity cost, and that would again come as an indirect cost. It is again an externality that needs to be accounted for. Then there is, for example, maybe that land was for open wilderness in which wildlife survived over there, and the difficult thing would be to put a price tag on that that piece of land. And then the second issue is like decrease in water table in surrounding areas, because you need to consider that water accumulating in that area in which you are taking up that irrigation project is coming from some place. So if that water is coming from some place, that would mean that there is decreased water level in those areas. So that would mean that there the cost borne in that sense, in a sense that their agri yield would drop, so that also needs to be included in the cost of this project. And secondly, for example, there in terms of indirect benefits, we also need to consider, I forgot to mention that before, I better mention it right now, that there would be an increased water level below the surface, and that would also benefit surrounding farmers who are maybe very close by to the aggregated irrigated area, and they might also benefit from it. So that needs to be included in terms of indirect benefits. Now, it is very important, as I said, to include all the direct and indirect benefits, and in order to include all the direct and indirect costs, so that authenticated evaluation of the project can be conducted. Now, this is a cost-benefit analysis of a hypothetical irrigation project. Now, let's assume that the project starts from year 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up to year n. Now there are certain costs, because it might be a capital intensive project, so it might be possible that certain costs of, for example, like capital and labor and construction would be up to the point where the project has started for first few years, and there would be no benefits out of it, because it is not just like that. For example, 44,000 acres that was done for Nebraska in US in 1967, like that today I plan to start the irrigation facility, and tomorrow the land is fertile, and then the next day the crop is coming out and being sold in the market, and I can see the benefits immediately. The benefits might take certain years to come. That's why we were considering like the issue of discounting the returns and cost and bringing them on the same platform, and then seeing whether the project was viable or not. So there is a table over here of hypothetical irrigation project, and these are like certain hypothetical values that we have assigned. On the left side there are like costs first. Then that is engineering and planning, building and construction. Then those costs would be incurred while the project is being built. Then there is maintenance cost. Maintenance cost would be in terms that project once the project is up and running, you need to hire certain manpower and equipment to keep that irrigation facility well maintained, so that it keeps giving you returns. Those would be costs that would be starting after the project initial cost has been borne. It is a possibility that that sort of an irrigation facility would be a capital intensive sort of a project in the start, so there would be huge cost borne in the start, and then later on those costs would diminish, and there would be only maintenance cost. Then loss in agriculture, loss in recreation, and all the total cost. Loss in agriculture might be because of, as I discussed, that in terms of indirect cost, that area you procure land for that, and that land could have been used for agriculture crops, and there is an opportunity cost to that also. So that needs to be included till the life of the project, maybe 10 years or 20 years. And then there is loss in recreation, as I said, that for example that might be a wilderness area in which the project is built, and there is wildlife surviving over there and living over there, and people use that for their recreation, maybe camping or hunting or activities like that. And there is a loss in recreation area during the time of the project and after the even through the life of the project. And then there are total costs, which like is the addition of all the costs above. Then there are benefits. Benefits are like increased agriculture, increased recreation, and because of creation of that lake, and those benefits are added in the last row. On the right side, like there are from second column onwards, there are mentioned years up to 1 to 6 and then up to n. N would represent the life of the project. So if you look at this, then the first thing is engineering and planning, and that has been represented. We are not putting numbers over here, we are just putting alphabets to show the scenario of how cost and benefit analysis might be conducted. For example, for engineering and planning, there is cost for the 1 year, for the year first, which is represented by E, and that engineering and planning represents the initial cost which has been employed in terms of all the design and per procure all the design and for example all planning activities that are required for which that irrigation project has to be taken up. Then there is building and construction. That building and construction might be a very high cost, considering requirement of so much capital and so much labor, considering it would be a capital intensive project because when you have to dig a lake out of nowhere, and there would be, for example, even procurement of land in terms of planning cost that should be included in that. So building and construction is represented up to the first 5 years, F1 up to F5. That represents the cost incurred in each year for building and constructing that irrigation facility. Then there is maintenance cost. The maintenance cost is not included in first 5 years. It starts from where the project is ready and workable. That would be the year 6, and M6 represents the first maintenance cost that has been incurred in year 6, and it also goes up to the life of the project. We assume that N might be 10 years, so it might be 10 or 20 or 30 years. For example, let's assume that it is 20 years, N is 20 years, the irrigation facility has 20. No doubt that it would be much longer period than that. It might survive for 30 or 40, even more than that, but just to simplify our analysis, we would consider that it is 20 years. So it starts from the year 6, the maintenance cost starts from year 6 and it goes up to 20 years, which is represented by MN, and that would mean that maintenance cost will start after the project is up and running. So up to the building and construction cost is only up to year 5, because that would be the time when all the activity of labor and capital are employed to build that project. Now then there is cost of loss in agriculture. Loss in agriculture again would start from the first year, because when you procure land for building of that water reservoir or lake, and when you procure land for making those canals and all that, then immediately that land won't be able to be utilized for agriculture crop. So that cost is borne from the first year to the life of the project, which is we assumed over here that it is 20 years. So it is that cost is being incurred every year. Sorry. Then there is loss in recreation. Loss in recreation again would start from the first year, because once you procure that land, then that recreation facility is gone, which we mentioned that it might be some part of that land might be agri land, which goes into loss in agriculture. Some part of that land might be for recreation. It would be an open wilderness area. So that recreation has a cost of itself again. So that starts from the year 1, when the land is procured and trees are cut and the construction process starts. So the total cost accruing in each year are represented by C1, C2, C3, and goes up to the life of the project, which is C20 or CN written over here, but we are assuming 20 years over here. And then there are benefits of the project. Now one major contrast you see over here among cost and benefits is that costs start to incur from the very first day or the first year, when the project is the building and construction process and planning and engineering process starts, and even in loss in agriculture and loss in recreation start from the very first year. Only one of the costs, which is maintenance costs, starts where the project is up and running. So if the irrigation facility even starts, the returns are not going to come very immediately, but if we assume that from the 6th year the facility is available, there is increased agriculture output. So that would start from is represented as A6 over here, increase in agriculture output, and it goes up to AN. Then we see that once the lake is built and it is used for recreation, then that would also be starting from year 6 once the project is complete and up and running, and that recreation facility might be in terms of for example swimming and picnics and boating and fishing in that lake. So that would again start from the year 6 once the project is handed over and it is up and running, as I said. Then there are total benefits which start from the year 6. So the first 5 years there are only costs, and from the 6th year onwards there are only benefits. Now this is how I hope you understand what the next step would be, because this is evaluating. First we did the listing of all the cost and benefits. Then over here in this table we did evaluation of all the cost and benefits. Listing would be enumerating the cost and benefits, just making a list of them. Then there is the process of evaluation. Evaluation would mean putting a dollar value to all the cost and benefits, whether direct or indirect. So this is what we have done over here. Now we have total cost for each year from 1 to n, and we have total benefits of each year from 1 to n. Now what we need to do over here is what I ask you to answer, but I can't hear your answer, so let me answer it myself. That is the advantage that you guys have going through a video lecture. But what we need to do over here is to get a social discount rate, and through that social discount rate we need to discount all the future values into the present value, and then see when they have been discounted in current dollar values, what would be what would be the difference between cost and benefits. That would mean that we would have to considering an R1 of the discount factor. For the first year we would write C1 divided by 1 plus R1 raised to power sum of 1 plus R1 whole raised to power 1, then plus C2 for year 2 divided by 1 plus R whole raised to power 2, C plus C3 divided by 1 plus R whole raised to power 3, and going up to Cn divided by 1 plus R whole raised to power n. So in this way we would discount all the cost, and similar way would be used to discount all the benefits, and then we can easily see. The important thing would be to calculate to see what social discount rate should be used over here, because that is again debatable whether that sort of investment is actually displacing the consumption or it is displacing the investment. In my view, this sort of an irrigation project would be displacing the investments, so the government should use the discount rate equal to, at least equal to the gross. If they have taxed the investments, then at least equal to the gross rate, that rate of return requested by demanded by the investor. So that rate should be used as a social discount rate in this case to discount all these future values to the present value, and then see whether benefits are greater and whether costs are greater. So if benefits are greater than cost, the project should be taken up, and if benefits are less than cost, the project should not be taken up. And secondly, one of the important aspects would be that government might consider this project, they calculate the cost and benefits and put it on the table along with other projects that might be utilizing similar level of resources, or whose outcome might be similar in terms of increasing agriculture output. Maybe they are considering like subsidizing, they are considering like to starting a project of for example land fertility through chemicals. So there are various projects. So what they would do is, when they evaluate this project, because the resources are scarce, the budget that they have to allocate to each project, and they also need to see the opportunity cost of those funds, so they put make a list of those and rank them as we discussed, the ranking process, in which government can rank it through cost benefit and cost ratio, or they can rank them through in terms of net benefit that each project is given. Then they would choose whether to take up that project or not. I hope you understand the concept of cost and benefit analysis. We have done it very systematically in this case of a hypothetical irrigation project. I would summarize that by the end of this lecture. Now we consider another cost and benefit analysis, a hypothetical project, which would be in this case would be widening of an existing highway. Now there are why would government need to widen an existing highway, and what would be the benefits and costs that government needs to consider while widening an existing highway? Because of there are sort of while considering traffic congestions, there are basically there is an engineering concept of evaluating or avoiding the traffic congestions, and there is an economic concept of avoiding the traffic congestions. Engineering concept would be to widen all the highways and to increase the traffic flow or remove all the bottlenecks. And economic sort of a concept, if considered, would be to increase the prices so that demand decreases. For example, if on motorway the rates of or the prices of toll is increased, then people might be using the less of motorway to travel from one city to another. That is another concept. But over here the scenario is totally different. That does not mean that widening of an existing highway also does not need an economic analysis. It does, and it also considers a there is a requirement of cost and benefit analysis. Now, how would we conduct the benefit of cost and benefit analysis of widening an existing highway? What we need to do is, first we need to consider all the costs and we need to consider all the benefits. Now, how would we consider all the benefits? We would need to estimate the demand for travel as a function of average cost per trip. Like if we widen the highway, the trips might increase, and there would be more demand of the use of that highway. So that would be a benefit for that project, and cost would be discussed in next slides. So the benefit would be in terms of increased demand of travel on that highway, and that increased demand of travel would also be most necessarily be a function of average cost of each trip. The cost of trip, for example, in terms of fuel, in terms of depreciation of the vehicle, in terms of maintenance, and most important in terms of value of time. So the expansion of the highway actually would reduce the cost of each trip, because the traffic flow would be increased, and there would be then that would result into benefits towards those individuals who are already traveling on that road, and their cost of trip is reduced because there is increased traffic flow, specifically in terms of value of time that they would save, and free flow traffic would cost them lesser fuel, and there would be lesser vehicle depreciation. Plus there would also be benefit for those individuals who have started to travel on that highway because it is being widened, and they were avoiding it beforehand because of the traffic congestions on that highway. So in order to estimate the demand for travel as a function of average cost, we have a graph over here. The graph shows on the x-axis is number of trips per year. T and T slash represent some hypothetical numbers, and on the y-axis there is average cost per trip. So what we are seeing over here is that once the highway is expanded, the downward sloping demand curve represents the demand for trips on that highway. So once the highway is expanded, the average cost per trip would reduce. Now with that reduction in the average cost per trip from C to C slash on y-axis, the number of trips would increase, and the new equilibrium point would be at point D. The previous equilibrium point at the existing cost and cost per trip was B, which represented T number of trips, and C was the cost per trip. Now with increase and expansion by adding more lanes, maybe 2 lanes on that highway, 2 more lanes on that highway, that would reduce the cost of travel, and that would reduce the cost of travel to C slash. And since the demand is a function of average, in this case demand is a function of average cost per trip, so that would increase the number of trips, and the new equilibrium point would be T slash. So in a sense, this rectangular shape, the shaded area, represents the cost savings and consumer surplus. Cost savings in a sense from C prime, B and A, those are cost savings by the existing travelers and on people who join that travel, and then there is a certain consumer surplus which is represented by A, B and D shaded area. So the total benefit for expanding that highway for the travelers would be the sum of this cost saving as well as the consumer surplus. I hope you know what is consumer surplus. I don't remember if I've explained it before or not. Consumer surplus, let's consider a simplistic example, that due to market forces of prices of tea, the price of that tea is defined at ₹50. Now demand curve is downward sloping, so that now 1 cup of tea may be at ₹20, for example, at a given restaurant. Now Now that would mean, since the demand curve is downward sloping, that equilibrium point is somewhere in the middle, just like in this case, maybe at point B. Now demand curve is downward sloping, that would mean there would be people above that point B who would be purchasing that product. No doubt the quantity would be lesser because some of the people won't buy it, but there would be people who would be buying it at that price. But now they have to pay less and they would consume. So that is actually consumer surplus. Consumer surplus, in simple words, is the difference between how much you value the product, because the demand curve represents how much you value the product, because nobody would pay a price higher than the value they consider for that product. So if I value tea for rupees 50, but when I go to the market, I purchase tea at rupees 20, so that 30 rupees difference is my consumer surplus that indirectly goes into my pocket. So having explained the consumer surplus, over here ABD represents consumer surplus, because from B to D there are people who would be willing to go on those trips at a higher average cost also. But now, because of widening of that highway, they are incurring a lower average cost of C slash. So now that area which indirectly goes into their pocket, that is consumer surplus, because the individual at point B values the trip at C, but due to expansion now he pays C slash. So in that sense, that area is consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is very important, and consumer surplus increases with the for example competitive markets, and we don't need to go into detail of microeconomics right now, but I just needed to express the concept of consumer surplus for your understanding. Consumer surplus is how much, the difference between how much you value the product and how much you actually pay for it. So in this demand curve, let's say there is an individual B, individual T, who is at point B, and he would use T trips now, and he is paying the cost in terms of C. Now when due to expansion the cost decreases to C slash, he was willing to, he values that trip at C, but now he is paying C slash. So that is his consumer surplus, represented by the triangle ABD. So the sum of this triangle and the rectangle is the total benefit of in terms of cost saving, and consumer surplus is the total benefit derived from expansion of that highway. Moving on to costs of widening an existing highway, there would of course be very simplistic labor and capital cost for widening that highway. Those can be directly attributable to the project, and then there would be injuries while building that highway, and those can also be attributable to the project. Then there are losses from slowdown in traffic due to traffic at the time of construction. Those costs would be again sort of direct cost for the project, because once the process of construction, as we discussed in irrigation project as well, that returns from the project do not start coming while the project is available and up and running. So once the construction process is ongoing, there might be more traffic congestions on the road, and those traffic congestions on the road would slow down the traffic, and for that temporary interim period, that would actually increase the average cost for people who are already traveling it, and they would get the benefit out of it later on when the road is expanded and they can freely they can go from point A to point B with in a free-flowing traffic. So there would be losses from slowdown in traffic during the process of construction. Then there would be indirect costs also. Indirect cost in terms of pollution, for example, that is an indirect cost of the whole construction process. Indirect cost in terms of destruction of wilderness, because that land needs to be acquired, and that land might be a government land, but it might be wilderness also, with the trees and birds and greenery over there, and once that is included in the highway, there would be destruction of wilderness, and that would be an indirect cost that requires to be, that is indirectly attributable to the project, and that needs to be included as a cost. Then there would be, when Now, whenever we need to consider reduction in cost in terms of on some, because people coming from the other highways, if they were not using this highway before and they were using some other highway for traveling between those, and on those roads the traffic congestion would reduce now. So because the people would be coming over here, there would be less traffic congestion in those areas, and there would be less pollution in those areas. So that also be required to be accounted from these total cost. In other words, that indirect cost should also be, while calculating the total cost of pollution and the total cost of traffic congestion while the building of the project, construction of the project, the traffic congestion reduced on the other road and traffic congestion and pollution reduced on the other road also needs to be subtracted from this total cost, so that we have actual account of all the cost and benefits. Now you see that based on these we can also make a same hypothetical table in which we can see the various costs and various benefits listed down, and how they would be converted into dollar values. It is somewhat obvious over here, and we need not go through all that tabular form again, but we considered another example. The aim of this was like first we had an irrigation project, and now we have widening of an existing highway as another hypothetical example, and which has its benefits and cost, and we saw that how we can enumerate those costs and benefits, and how we can evaluate those costs and benefits, and taking up the discount factor, and those would be secondary objectives that can be done later on. Now, another important aspect which I discussed in the last class under various headings, and I highlighted that under the cost benefit analysis there are various issues of how human life is to be valued. Now let us consider a program for that. Like for example, there is a health program. Now through a health program, maybe it's based on cancer research, maybe it's based on polio vaccinations, maybe it's based on reduction of accidents, for example, avoiding deaths from accidents, from redesigning a highway. Now the aim of that project is to reduce the mortality rate or prolong human life. All those projects is to prolong human life. So but how do we value human life? How do we put a price tag on human life? That is the most debatable question which we would come through in cost benefit analysis, because it is the most difficult thing to do, because value of life for maybe value of my life would be different for you, and your life would be different for me. So when conducting analysis, and the basic issue is how would you assign that value of life? So if would you assign it on, for example, pay scales or the income you earn? So that would mean rich people have a high value of their lives and poor people have low value of their lives, while or would you assign it to age and experience? So that would mean that for example, and a 65-year-old maybe have lesser earning potential, and maybe his experience is higher, so he has higher value of life than a 20-year-old who's very productive. But then again, if you assign from earning power, the 20-year-old has a higher earning capacity than a 65-year-old individual. So would that mean that 20 years old value of life is much higher than that 65-year-old guy? So it is a very debatable thing that we need to discuss over here. Now, for example, the aim, as we discussed, while that government needs to consider the objectives of various programs. So any program whose aim, all the health programs actually aim to reduce the mortality rate or reduce level of injuries or illness, or for example, in terms of highway, they might their objective is to reduce the injuries or fatal deaths from fatal accidents. So all those projects are evaluated on the basis of the lives that they save. So the issue is how do they value? Now maybe there is an example which I would discuss over here, that how would you create benefits? So benefits would be reduced mortality rate, reduced level of injuries or illness, and avoiding accidental death program, a certain program by the government to redesign a highway access point so that there are less number of accidents over there and less number of injuries and fatalities. Now the debate comes all around again that if you increase, if you improve that access point on the highway, and you reduce number of accidents over there, then the result would be an increase in, for example, mortality, decrease in mortality rate. On the other hand, once that access point is improved, there would be increased traffic flow, and once there is increased traffic flow, there might be more accidents. So it is always very controversial, and if maybe even if there are no more accidents over there, or less number of accidents over there, the traffic flow might increase, and that would result into more cost in terms of congestion of traffic. So again, the issue is that how do we evaluate such kind of health programs, or for example life-saving sort of programs? So the main question comes down to how do we value life. Now one way is, for example, discounted present value of future earnings. That would be then again, as I mentioned, that if you consider my future earnings, considering my education level and all that, and your future earnings of education level, so maybe when we assign certain values to us, maybe you are earning more than me. So does that mean that if you are rich and I'm not, so your life is more valuable than mine? And in a case, for example, maybe I'm older than you, and my future earnings are for maybe next 20 years, and then I would retire, and you are young and you have a potential for that, and you would be earning for like maybe next 40 years. So when you discount those earnings, would that mean that a young guy's value of life is much better than an old man's value of life? So how do you assign a value of life to those two individuals, or rich and poor, or old versus young? Huge debate on that. Now one another way is to, for example, conduct a survey treating such a government program as a public good. Now when we treat it as a public good, always attributable to that public good, the scenario is that there are free rider problem also. But ignoring that for the moment, we can conduct a survey questionnaire giving a scenario to an individual, that assuming that we construct that motorway entrance to make it more efficient, so that rate of accidents are reduced. And once rate of accidents are reduced, that would mean your for example, cost of that accident would be your life, or cost of that accident to you would be damage to your car. And these are the costs, assuming that this is what we are saving for you once we are making that entrance, or that link to the motorway more efficient. So, or that highway more efficient and more effective, so that there are less number of accidents. And we give a scenario to an individual, then ask them that if that is being done, how much you would be willing to pay to build that, for example, junction on the motorway. Let's assume that on the motorway the government wants to build a junction in such a way that there is reduced numbers of accidents when people get on the actual motorway from there. Now that you give somebody, you come to me and you give me a scenario that if that motorway junction is built, in that case you would be paying, I would be saving my life, and I would be, if I pay, I would be saving my life, and I would be saving a cost of that accident, and all the problems that I might go through after that accident. So in that case, what would be the my willingness to pay, and how much I would be able to pay to get that benefit out of that project. And now in that case, average dollar response can be used as a crude index to value life. But again, there are issues with this also, because unless there is an actual scenario, people won't be actually willing to estimate their or express their marginal benefit derived out of that activity, or there would again be a free rider problem. So this is one way that I just explained, that we might be able to value life. Now, as a last hypothetical example, let us consider, like this would be more related to United States of America, where there are like very like in ice hockey or rugby, they have teams that are very famous for various states, and they compete in international competitions. So if they want to build a sports stadium in their local region, how cost benefit analysis can be conducted by the state and local governments. Why only by state and local governments? Because if they build a stadium, the main aim of this whole process is that whenever they can, for example, they build a stadium in Boston area or in some regional, in any other regional state, they would attract a team and a team to that area, and the local citizens can then associate to that team, and they can cheer for that team, and they would be that would be a sort of entertainment that would be beneficial for them. Now in this case, that team would be for example, now that team would be giving them benefit, but that team has come from some other state to the stadium built on, for example, our local region. Now so this cannot be the people in that area, in that region, would not be better off, and now we are better off. So since we at an international level, it cannot be, the cost benefit analysis cannot be conducted, because one state is better off and the other state is worse off because of movement of the team. Now but it needs to be considered that that analysis can be conducted on at local and state government level wherever the stadium is being built. Now why would taxpayers might be willing to support that despite the burden? So we need to consider these few points. Number one would be the new entertainment provided to the people in that area. Then there is pleasure of having a team to cheer for example, we can root for our local team, and we would be happy to see those competitions on the television, and we would be associating to them because that is the team of our area. Then the federal government actually in USA allows the local governments to issue tax exempted bonds for financing the building of those stadiums, and those tax exempted bonds in other sense they actually cost to the federal government in terms of the tax revenue, but the benefit is in terms of entertainment. Then supporters of construction of, now what we are doing over here is that we are looking at certain scenarios in which benefits and costs are being associated by those people who want the stadium, and then we would see where the mistakes are being done in that sort of analysis, cost and benefit analysis, like while making the list of cost and benefits, to see whether they had bias while making that list or whether they were unbiased. So while making that list, they would also argue that there is construction and job creation in the local area, which we would debate later on. They would also argue that tourists will buy souvenirs and spend dollars in the local community or local state or any other local city. So that would also be another benefit, and enough revenues will be generated later on when the team is over there, so that no more tax is required, more increased tax is required on the taxpayers, and the whole system would go self-sustainable. Now you see over here there is a list of benefits that and sources of funding that they have highlighted, so that by proponents of building a sports stadium in a local state or a local city. Now discussing that, now what would be the burden on the taxpayers? Those people who would consider it as not a viable project, they would argue against those people who would be considering it as a viable project. So with burden on taxpayers, they would say that there would be no excessive local job creation, because once that during the process of building that stadium, it is highly possible that the labor and capital and equipment are coming from being attracted from some other city. So there is no significant job creation in the local community, and that even that job creation for would be for a smaller time period. Once the stadium is complete, there would be no further job creations in that area. And the second argument would be usually when the matches are being conducted, when there are tournaments, number of external spectators are tourists, which were highlighted by proponents of building a stadium. They said that there would be tourists who would be spending their dollars in the local community, and that would again benefit the local community by buying souvenirs and purchasing consumption goods. But then those external spectators from other cities would not be very significant in number, and usually the local community is the one who's present in the stadium when there are matches. So there would be no significant gains out of that dollar spending. And the most important of all, even the teams don't spend domestically. The reason highlighted in this case would be because the teams are usually the members of the team or players are usually from other states, and so they are rather, they would save to spend in their own areas. And secondly, most important, that since they are young players, they if they consider that they can play this sport for only a specific time period, after that they would need to retire, so they would be saving that money rather than spending it in the local community. So you see, in this case, why we did this, we considered the example of the sports stadium, is that while enumerating cost and benefits, if there is a bias of the analyst towards taking up that activity, he would even attribute certain direct and indirect benefits towards which are not even present. So the analyst needs to be unbiased actually, and see the whole scenario as it is rather than as it should be. In any case, the conclusion in this case would be, because it is actually a burden, it would actually be only a burden on the taxpayers, and only benefits derived would be in terms of revenue from the stadium, in terms of higher amount of salaries for the players would be by the owner of that team and the team members, and rest of the population or rest of the members of the state or taxpayers would be under the burden as such, and there would be no long-term benefits accruing to them unless other than the entertainment that they would get. So it is very important to consider this in the true sense rather than what they want. So now we have considered the cost benefit analysis, and we have considered certain hypothetical examples. We have discussed that in detail, and various examples highlighted various aspects of how mistakes can be done and how it can be made more fruitful. And we discussed the making the list and evaluating the list, and then to selecting a social discount rate. So now we are discussing the role of cost benefit analysis in this in budgeting, and we would close this lecture over here, and then we would call it a night. Now, useful tool to policymakers attempting to quantify decision making, because cost and benefit analysis ensures that all the cost and all the benefits are quantified and actual decision can be made. Now, some social benefits are difficult to quantify, and there is difference of opinion on that always, as we discuss the value of human life. And in terms of the stadium example, like bias of an analyst might result into certain cost and evaluation of certain benefits which are not actually the benefits, or even listing of certain benefits which might not be the benefits of the project. And then the distribution of benefits plays a role in the political output of which programs are funded, because it is again we discuss that weighing of the benefits and cost, like where they are actually accruing to, low income class, high income class, various geographical locations. And whenever a project is taken up by the government, it is also important to see the cost and benefit analysis actually evaluates or expresses where the benefits and costs are actually accruing towards, whether it is the local population or the farmers, or for example any business entities. So where the cost would accrue towards and where the benefits would accrue towards. So cost benefit analysis is a very useful tool which can help policymakers by quantifying and then evaluating a project in terms of distribution of incomes and in terms of the opportunity cost of using those funds by the from the private sector. Now, by the end of this lecture, as has been the practice for like last few lectures, I would summarize this these slides once more. No doubt these were just the examples, but I would only highlight the various mistakes or various errors and in enumerating or listing or evaluating cost and benefits. The first one was a hypothetical irrigation project in which it was difficult to evaluate the water flow and put a value on water water flow. So what they do is that they would see the agri crop increase and its increase in the output and it being sold in the market. But in 1967 there was a mistake in Nebraska when the mistake that they did was that they actually took the prices that were already subsidized by the government. So if they do that, the prices, the actual benefits actually were not as they were portrayed. So that was an error in calculating the direct benefits, and then there were again indirect benefits out of it which needed to be accumulated. Then there were direct cost in terms of labor cost, and there was a debate over here that whether there should be a valuation of labor cost because jobs are being created in times of unemployment. And we discussed that that argument that to put a zero price on labor cost in terms of unemployment periods or recession periods would be wrong, because the labor that is being attracted towards that project would be specialized labor, and they would be coming out of certain other projects, and that would be there would be an opportunity cost for that. And the use of those funds, the resources that are being utilized in terms of capital and in terms of finances would be from the private sector, so there would be an opportunity cost for that. We discussed the indirect cost in terms of loss of agri land and in terms of decrease in water tables. Then we formulated a cost and benefit of analysis of hypothetical irrigation project in terms of a table, and we listed the cost and benefits on the left hand side, and then on the right hand side from column 1 from column 2 onwards we considered the various years in which various costs and various benefits are various costs are incurring and various benefits are coming out. So that list or that table actually helped us get an idea that certain costs would be incurred at the start of the project, and then there won't be any further incurring of those costs, and certain costs would be up till the point of completion of that project, and certain costs would keep on till the lifetime of the project, while benefits would usually start from the time when the project is up and running, and we need to discount those to present values and see whether the project should be taken up or not. And then we consider the widening of an existing highway, and in that case we considered that we need to estimate the demand for travel in terms of cost per trip, average cost per trip, and using this graph we considered the cost saving as C slash A and B. And we considered consumer surplus, which I defined as consumer surplus is the difference between how much you value the product and how much you actually pay for the product, and if that difference is positive, then that would mean that you have a consumer surplus. And ABD as area of consumer surplus, so the total benefit in this graph was the sum of consumer surplus and the cost savings. Then we considered the cost of that project, which were rather simpler in this scenario. Then we considered valuation of human life, because certain health programs and certain accident prevention program and fire protection programs by the government are to increase the value. Now the cost is incurred, that is rather simpler, but how do we calculate the benefits when the benefit is actually the increase in lives or increase in number of years that I would survive, or decrease in mortality rates or death rates. So that is a difficult scenario, and we consider two options. One option is to assign to get a discounted present value of future earnings, but that would be debatable, because in that case older people who have lesser earning potential and younger people who have more earning potential, there would be a difference among them. So that would automatically mean that younger people have higher value of life than the value of life of an old individual is low, which is wrong in at least in my view. And then the value of life of a rich person would be greater than value of a life of a poor, which is again wrong in, because value of life would be same for everybody. So then if we treat it as a public good and we do a survey in terms of a questionnaire, and we give the individual a scenario that this is the project that we are taking up, so these are the benefits of the project, this is how it would prolong your life, and this is how it would avoid certain disastrous future outcomes for you, so how much would you be willing to pay for it? And in that way, if we can make average dollar response as a crude index for value of life, but then there would be again a free rider problem, because because we would be treating it as a public good, which automatically comes with it. Then we considered a sports stadium example. We needed to show over here that the listing of cost and benefits, and listing of benefits specifically by the analyst, if it is in terms of bias towards taking up that project, that can result into a wronger outcome, or not, the outcome is not right, because why there would be certain people who would be willing to take up that project because in their minds maybe the benefit of entertainment is much higher, and they would be attributing certain benefits which are not actually attributable to the project. And when the individuals who, for example, whose benefit of entertainment is not that high, if that individual is evaluating the construction of a stadium, he would be thinking differently. Now, the role of cost of benefit analysis, we have discussed various examples, and we have seen, because in my view this part of the course has become very, you should show enthusiasm towards it, because it has become very interesting, and the course would be interesting when we are conducting like practical discussions over it. So it is a very useful tool for quantifying and making it easier for policy makers, quantifying the cost and benefit, and then making it easier for policymaker to see the opportunity cost of that project, or to see the actual benefits and cost, and also to see the cost and benefits which are accruing towards various geographical locations or various sort of income groups. I guess the time is over, but I just wanted to add over here that while quantifying, there is supposed to be difference of opinion, and that's why we highlighted in the last lecture and in the summary of this lecture that it is more of an art rather than a science. Hope to see you in the next lecture. Take care. Best of luck.